Melbourne with Ali Moore.
And it is coming up to 10 minutes to 5 on Drive. Every Tuesday in the lead up to the federal election, we are focusing on a key seat, a seat that will help to drive the outcome of the 2025 election. Today we're talking about Kooyong. You've met one of the community groups and you've met Amelia Hamer, who is the Liberal candidate for Kooyong. Monique Ryan, Dr Monique Ryan, often referred to as a teal, holds the seat with a margin of 2.2% against the Liberals and joins you in the studio. Dr Ryan, welcome.
Thanks, Ali.
How are you feeling in the lead up to this election? It's a very different space and time, I guess, to last election in 2022.
It is, and I suppose it's different to be an incumbent as well. Obviously, last time I was a challenger against someone who was the then Treasurer of Australia and Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party. It's also been a strange time because I do think there's a really strong argument in favour of fixed terms and 4-year terms in Australian politics, because it feels like we've been looking for the election date now for months and Australians are raring to go for it.
And it will be a very long campaign if we don't find out soon enough, I guess. Are you ready?
I don't know if you ever feel that you're ready. I think over the last 3 years have demonstrated within Kooyong an ability to listen to the community and to respond to what people have told me that they want and what they need and what's important to them. I think I've been doing that for 3 years, and so, yeah, I'm ready to get going on the election campaign itself.
And I guess that was a question I was going to ask you, was around whether you feel that you've achieved enough to show that an independent can be a meaningful representative of people in Kooyong. We spoke earlier with Amelia Hamer, the Liberal candidate, and I asked her whether it was harder being up against an independent. This is how she answered it.
An independent may be able to vote whatever way they want, but does that vote matter? The question is, how do we actually deliver things for people? You can put forward a policy platform and say, this is all the things that I believe, but the question is, how can you actually get that done?
It's a fair question for independents. How do you see that?
Well, I think you do need to demonstrate effect to your electorate. That's a really important thing to do. And I think I've done that within the electorate itself. I've been out and about on the streets of Kooyong every week, listening to people and to what they think is important. A good example of how I've carried that to Canberra and had a demonstrable effect is in HEX. So HEX wasn't an active issue at the time of the last federal election, but soon after that election, young people started to tell me that the burden of their HEX debts was insuperable, and their parents started to tell me that they were really concerned about the effects of those HEX debts on their kids. Over time, it became clear that it was a very big problem for many Australians, and I started a campaign to change that. Talked to the government on a number of occasions, raised it in the House, raised it in the media, started a petition that got 290,000 signatures, and eventually we got action from the government, and it was action that saved 3 million Australians $3 billion in HEX debts. And I think that's a pretty good proof of concept for what an independent can do.
Are you disappointed, though, that you got some action, but you've also got promises of further action, but the Labor government has got to win before that further action actually happens?
I think there's a lot to do on HEX, and the government has promised a 20% reduction in overall HEX debts after this election if they're re-elected, and that's one part of the puzzle, but there's a lot more to do actually in the tertiary education sector, and I really look forward to carrying that work forward in the next term of Parliament.
What would you do if there was a hung Parliament?
If there was a hung Parliament and I was re-elected to Parliament, and that's by no means a given, and if the major parties were looking for my support to form government, to give confidence and supply to either of those major parties, I would negotiate with both of them, and I would give confidence and supply where that required by either of the major parties to whichever one had mature, well-developed, evidence-based policies that were most in keeping with what the electorate of Kooyong tells me that it wants and needs.
And who do you think, does that seem to you logically to be the Liberals?
Well, it really would depend on what the Liberals were presenting. At the moment, the major issues in the electorate are cost of living, housing, and the Trumpification of politics in this country. They're the things I heard about when I was door knocking over the weekend. I would need the Liberal Party, if they were the party with the most seats, I guess that would be the person you might negotiate with first, to demonstrate that they have mature policies that will give young people in Australia the certainty that they can expect to be able to afford a home of their own in their own lifetime. It's a reasonable expectation. They don't have it right now. I haven't seen the Liberal Party come up with anything as yet in this election campaign that would give them that certainty, and I think they deserve that. Similarly, the Liberal Party has not come up with effective or well-costed or well-based, evidence-based policies on the energy transition or on cost of living. And those would be the things that I would be pushing them for.
So back to the issues, and you talk about cost of living as being a big one. Your third thing, I think it was the third one, the Trumpification of politics.
Yes.
Talk about that.
Well, it was fascinating, actually. So many conversations I had over the weekend were people saying, we're really concerned about what's going on in the States. We don't like the tenor of politics there. We don't like the capriciousness of the Trump presidency thus far. We're concerned about places like Ukraine and what's happening in Europe and what that's going to happen, what's that's going to mean for us. We're concerned about the uncertainty around tariffs and the economic impact of that.
But how does that, I suppose, boil down to the average person who is living in Kooyong and, walking their dog in the morning or going to work? Or
they're seeing Donald Trump come out with a new policy every day. In the last couple of weeks, they've seen Peter Dutton come out with policies for axing significant 36,000 public servants, which was a Trump policy. People saying, what does that mean? How's that going to affect services? How's that going to impact me? They've seen Donald Trump come out with this Doge and Jacinta Price push that as well. And then Peter Dutton say, well, okay, perhaps you can't work from home anymore and perhaps women should be job sharing. What they're seeing is this ill-thought-through thought bubbles coming from the leader of the opposition, and they don't like that capriciousness. It makes them feel unsettled and uneasy, and they're nervous about it.
That is obviously what people are telling you, but then if you look at the poll that was published this morning, it's a Freshwater Strategies poll, and it shows that Liberal Party candidates across 6 of the Teal seats, including Kooyong, on an average, two-candidate preferred vote of 51 to 49 to the Teals. So at this point, you and a number of your Teal colleagues could be in trouble. Do you read that poll, or how do you read that poll is what I should say to you?
I don't think there's a safe seat in this country anymore. I think we saw that in 2022. I actually think that's a really good thing for democracy in this country, because if we have a close contest, a contest of ideas and values in every seat around the country, our politics will be better for it.
So you're happy to take the uncertainty?
I think there's great uncertainty. I by no means feel that I'm secure in Kooyong, and that's fine. I think I should have to prove to my electorate, to the electorate, that I'm worthy of keeping this seat. I hope to do that, but I by no means take it for granted.
You're listening to Dr. Monique Ryan, who's the independent member for Kooyong, and we're focusing on Kooyong today. Do you think, and again, I just talked about that poll, but you've also had a redrawing of the boundaries since the last election, and I guess with those redrawing, taking in parts of the old, the now abolished Higgins, there's some pretty blue ribbon areas that have come into your electorate. Do you think that does boost the chance of Amelia Hamer?
Well, I understand that I now have half of the Liberal Party members of Victoria are resident in the seat of Kooyong. Look, in 2022, I stood for a seat that had been held by Conservatives for 122 years, and no one gave me the slightest chance of being successful at that time. I think the electorate has changed. I think Australia has changed, and I by no means take anything for granted, but I don't think that I would discount my chances of being able to hold Kooyong.
Do you think it's going to be a civilised election campaign? And I'm not just talking in Kooyong, I'm thinking more broadly.
Well, I have to say it's been pretty willing thus far. So the Liberal Party has twice already lifted the whole of Kooyong with very personal negative attack ads aimed at me, which has made it challenging already. It's not something that I'll do, but I do think part of that Trumpification of politics has included a permissiveness of language and of the way that people address politicians and deal with politicians that has probably changed over time. I don't think it's for the better.
Dr. Monique Ryan, thank you so much for coming in.
That's a pleasure.
That is the independent member for Kooyong running again in the election. We don't know when it is, but we do know it's got to be before May the 17th. It is time for the news.